Now, what would you like tonight's story to be about?
I want to start about a jetfighter shoots Skoobydoo.
I see. So tonight's story is going to be about Skoobydoo and the jetfighter. Now, just to tell you, as you know, in Skoobydoo, there's the dog whose name is Skoobydoo, and then we've got Shaggy, who's the one who has a little bit of a beard on the bottom of his chin, and likes to eat a lot, just like Skoobydoo. And then we've got in the story.
Who likes to eat Skoobydoo?
That's Shaggy, the one with the little beard, and Skoobydoo's the dog. And Skoobydoo and Shaggy both like to eat a lot of food. So if they see a big food, they'll eat it. And then the other ones we got in the Skoobydoo story are Fred. I can't tell you much about him. And then we've got Velma, and we've got Daphne.
Daphne?
Yes, and their job is to find spooky things. Anyway.
Skoobydoo things.
Once upon a time, Shaggy, Fred, Scooby, Velma and Daphne, the gang, I'll call them, were in their bus driving along the road when suddenly a big thunderstorm started, and it started pouring with rain, and the rain was coming down very, very hard, and there were flashes of lightning. Oh dear, they said, I do hope we can get back to home because if we run out of petrol, we'll be really in trouble. And then they looked at the petrol meter, and there wasn't much petrol left in the van. But they kept going and going and going until suddenly the van started to stutter because it was running out of petrol. And then finally it stopped. Now Fred, who was driving the van, tried the key in the ignition several times. He tried to restart it, but the van just wouldn't start. It had no petrol. Oh no, they all said. What are we going to do? We can't spend the night in the van. And it's raining so heavily outside. And look at the lightning. And just then, as they said it, there was a huge flash of lightning, and it lit up this area around the van.
And they can see little things coming and more and more. But there's many more. They quite see something coming. But then, you see lots of guns watching you do.
Well, we'll get to what happened. Just as the lightning went off, up in the sky, they saw a jet fighter flying over at very high speed with 4 missiles at the bottom. That's interesting. Did you see that jet fighter? Said Velma. Yes, said Daphne. I wonder where that was going. It's most unusual to have a jet fighter flying in a thunderstorm. And it was flying very close to us too. Almost as if it's trying to scare us away. Well, the 4 young teenagers discussed what they'd do next. After thinking about it, Shaggy said, you know what, I'm really hungry. Just then, there was another huge flash of lightning, and as the lightning flashed, they could see that there was a castle very near to the van on the road. Look, said Shaggy, there's a castle. Maybe they have food. Oh, come on, said Fred. You're always thinking about your tummy.
But there's a bad guy there. There's a bad guy.
Well, we'll find out.
There's a bad guy.
Maybe there's somebody bad there. Mm-hmm. And Shaggy said, woof, woof, which means I'm hungry too. So the children decided that they had no choice because the van wasn't going to go anywhere, and it was pouring with rain, and they couldn't spend the night in the van. There wasn't enough room. We have no choice. We'll have to go and knock on the castle door and see if we can go in. So they all got out of the van, ran up to the castle, where they ran across the drawbridge, which was down to the castle gate, and then rang the bell several times. But nobody answered. They pushed the door, and it was a huge iron door, and it swung open with a big groan of rusty metal. "Look, I think we'd better go in." So the 4 teenagers and Skoobydoo went in. "Hello," they said. "Is anybody here?" There was no answer. "Hello?" Just then, the jet fighter flew over the castle again. Very loud and very close. "My goodness me, anyone would say that's trying to frighten us away," said Velma. Into the castle they went and looked around, shouting, "Anybody here? Anybody here?" But there was no answer. Eventually they came to the kitchen. And do you know what Shaggy did? The first thing he did, he was look in the fridge to see if there was some food. And sure enough, there was a roast chicken and some sandwiches. He grabbed the sandwiches and started scoffing them. But Skoobydoo was hungry. He said, "Woof, woof," which means, "I want some too." Shaggy gave Skoobydoo some of the sandwiches. Then Skoobydoo looked at the chicken and said, "Woof, woof." Well, Shaggy pulled off a chicken leg for himself and gave another chicken leg to Skoobydoo. Well, when Velma and Daphne saw Scooby and Shaggy eating, they decided to help themselves to a little sandwich. But there wasn't very much left because Skoobydoo and Shaggy had eaten almost everything. Poor Fred had nothing. "Well," said Fred, "I don't know if we really should have taken their food. That wasn't very good. But there doesn't seem to be anybody here. So maybe it's no harm. Maybe they left it for people like us who get stuck in the rain." Just then, they heard the huge roar of a jet engine coming closer and closer. And they looked out of the window, and they saw out of the back window of the castle was a landing strip for jet fighters. And the jet fighter came down from the sky and landed in the courtyard.
It just goes like that. It goes like that. It just goes down like that. It goes down like this.
That's right. It goes forward, not down from the sky like that. So they decided to go and see who was flying the jet fighter. They went out into the rain with umbrellas this time because there were some umbrellas by the back door. And in the rain, they walked towards the jet fighter. But as they did it, the jet fighter turned itself around and its missiles were pointing at them. And just then, the missiles started firing. Boom! Shh! The children jumped out of the way and ran out of the way of the missiles just in time. Then the jet fighter turned to face them again and fired another missile. Shoo! It missed them again. They started running as fast as they could. And the jet fighter started to move and run after them. The 4 children ran back into the castle. The jet fighter didn't fire at the castle because it would have destroyed the castle. And then suddenly they saw somebody getting out of the jet fighter. But it wasn't a man or a pilot as you'd expect. It was a skeleton with a skull and bones. And the skeleton started coming towards them, clunkety, clunkety, clunk, rattling his bones. "No," they shouted, "it's a skeleton, a live skeleton walking." And they started to run away, and the skeleton started to chase them through the castle. Suddenly they came into a room with lots of suits of armour, metal armour. And they jumped into the suits of armour to hide. Then the skeleton came in the room, clickety, clickety, click, clickety, click at his bones. He looked around, couldn't see them, and thought they must have gone out of the door at the other end. So the skeleton left by the door at the other end of the big room. Then the 4 children and the dog got out of their skeletons. Sorry, not got out of the skeletons, got out of their armour. And in fact, Skoobydoo got into dog's armour as well. And then they started to go the other way. Then they couldn't they stayed very, very quiet, waiting to see if the skeleton was around, but they couldn't see or hear him. Let's go and see what's going on. And they crept down the stairs towards the kitchen. And there, in the kitchen, they saw the skeleton looking in the fridge for his food. But when he looked in the fridge and saw there was no food, he seemed to be very angry. "Hey," said Velma, "that's strange. Skeletons don't eat food. They're dead. How can this one want food?" Then they saw the skeleton take a glass of milk from the fridge and drink it. "What's going on?" said Daphne. "The skeleton, which was flying the aeroplane, is now drinking milk. If he's a skeleton, he shouldn't be able to drink anything." And Skoobydoo said, "Wom," meaning, "I'd like to drink milk." Just then, the skeleton heard Skoobydoo going, "Woof, woof," and the skeleton turned round and started to run towards them. They ran, the children, but as they ran, they came into a room where there was a giant net, like a butterfly net. "Maybe we could use this," shouted Fred. So Fred grabbed the butterfly net and hid behind the door. And the other children went to the other end of the room to act as bait for the skeleton. And as the skeleton ran through the door, Fred threw the butterfly net over his head and caught him. Now the skeleton couldn't move, and he was caught. "Right," said Fred, "we've caught the skeleton. Let's see." And then they realized that he was not really a skeleton. He was wearing some black clothes with bones drawn on them to look like a skeleton. "Well, we'll see who it really is," said Fred. And he went over to the skeleton, which was now, you could see, was just a man wearing black clothes with bones drawn on them. And whoever it was wearing a hood with a skull drawn on it in white. And he grabbed the hood and lifted it up. And there was a little old man. "What are you doing?" said Fred, "pretending to be a skeleton?" The little old man said, "I'm terribly sorry. I live alone and I don't like anyone coming near my castle. That's why I flew the jetfighter over you and tried to shoot you to get rid of you." "Well," said Fred, "that's bad. You should be friendly to people." "I don't like friends." "Well, we could be your friends," said Fred. "Yes," said Velma, "we'd be your friends." "Woof, woof," said Skoobydoo, which meant, "I like you." And Skoobydoo went over the little old man and started licking his face. Well, the little old man had never had a friend before in his life. He was a very lonely man, and suddenly he had 4 friends. Well, actually 5 friends if you include Skoobydoo the dog. And the dog was wagging his tail and licking the man's face. And the 4 friends started to talk to the man to see why he was all alone and so lonely. Well, he just was lonely because he didn't have any friends. But now he had Skoobydoo, the dog. He had Fred. He had Shaggy. He had Velma. And he had Daphne as his friends. And they talked and talked and talked. And then they made a very nice meal, and everyone ate a lovely meal together with the former skeleton, which was now an old man. And after talking for a while, they explained that their bus had broken down because it had no petrol and they couldn't get home that night. So the old man said, "Don't you worry, you can sleep in my castle tonight. Every one of you can have your own bedroom." And Skoobydoo said, "Woof, woof," which means, "I want to sleep with Shaggy." So actually that's what happened. Shaggy slept in the bed, and Skoobydoo slept on top of the bed covers while Shaggy was asleep. And when they woke up in the morning, they were friendly to the man again, had another big breakfast with him, talked and talked, and then said, "How are we still going to get home? Our van has got no petrol." And that's when the man who was flying the jet fighter said, "Well, you're in luck, children, because as you saw, I fly a jet for my hobby. I like flying a jet. And guess what? Jets take petrol, just like your van. So I happen to have lots of cans of petrol. I'll give you one of my cans of petrol for your van." So the man took one of his cans of petrol and went with the children out to the van and helped them fill up the van. Now the van would start. Fred turned the key in the ignition and it went rum, rum, rum. "It's working," said Fred. "Hooray," said the children. And then they all waved bye-bye to the old man, and the old man waved bye-bye with a big smile, so happy to have made friends with 4 children, teenagers, nearly adults, and a dog. And Skoobydoo said woof woof, which means bye-bye, I like you. Woof 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 woof, said Skoobydoo. And off the children went back to their home. And that's the end of the Skoobydoo story. What did you think of that?
Good. But what are you looking at that book?
Well, sometimes the 4 children and Skoobydoo like to look at books.
But why are you looking at the book?
They're reading a story.
But what story is it called?
It's called Skoobydoo.
And is it fighter?
Well, it might be Skoobydoo and the jet fighter, but I expect that's a new adventure, so they probably hadn't got that story in their book yet. It's a book of all the adventures they'd had. And as you know, Skoobydoo and the 4 teenagers love to solve mysteries, and usually they're haunted houses or things like that, just like the castle they went in. What an adventure. And with that, we're going to end the story. Good night.